Hi, SASS listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS podcast. I'm glad you're here. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. This is episode 159, part 2 of the concluding episode of David Wood's critically important story of hidden tortures, undeveloped memories, and answers found in profound and powerful ways. David's Part 2 episode is an intriguing account of his childhood sexual abuse that had negative impacts on several levels, but he also tells us about his unstoppable drive to find answers to his deep-seated traumas. A warning, this episode is detailed and graphic. Listener discretion is strongly advised. While difficult to hear for some, I encourage you to hear David tell his story and use it for your own healing and for its important informational content. We'll pick up right where David left off last week. Here's David.
Demonstrative show of affection and love even is particularly what I needed, because I came from more of a cold, sterile sort of English upbringing where it was all about thoughts and was not about emotion. Anyway, that's my little bit of a rant, actually. You might need to get me back on track.
Can I ask a question or two about where we're at? David, you mentioned that there were times where you just couldn't get out of bed. And I'm really wondering if you can help me understand. I mean, you said you were 16. What did that do with your relationship with your parents? If you're laying in bed and not capable of functioning on the farm or with school, and you're laying in bed, what was their reaction to you? How did they respond to that?
Because it's so long ago, I can't be sure of exactly what went on. And they did take me to that psychologist when I was 16 or 17 on the teacher's advice. And I do believe it was my choice not to go anymore. But I don't think they did anything outside of that, is my memory of it. I don't think they were capable of doing anything because our family didn't talk about things. Basically, my conversations with my parents would have been about the weather and about day-to-day affairs. There was nothing ever of significance ever spoken about. And my memory of when, after I left school and became a dairy farmer, is that my parents didn't do anything and they didn't talk to me about it. And I had no one in my life that was as Ann Miller would call, an enlightened witness. I had no one that I could confide in, and I now know that my attachment system was so badly damaged that I wouldn't have trusted anyone to help me anyway. And I think I just would have died there and no one would have done anything to help me. And it's taken me a lot to come to terms with that like my parents are not horrible people. They're just the product of the environment that they came out of. But at the same time, my memory of it is that they sat there, they lived in the same house as me, and they didn't do anything to help me when I was bedridden with depression. I would get up and milk the cows in the morning, and I'd be so exhausted that I'd have to go back to bed while my father ate breakfast. And I remember the shame and how bad I felt about laying in bed there, but I couldn't do anything but lay in bed. And we had this old house that was an old gold rush house that had been moved onto the farm. And I'd hear him walking down the hall, his footsteps in the creek, and I would just instantly freeze up and feel so ashamed. And he would knock on the door and said, "David, are you coming out to do some work?" And that's my memory of the conversations that went on around it. And obviously the passage of time means maybe I'm missing something and I don't remember it, but It's broadly it.
David, this is absolutely devastating to me to hear your recollection of all of your growing years and what you're going through. And it's obvious that it's extremely hard to talk about even now. How are you coping? How are you getting through being able to do this? And what is your motivation?
There's something within me that has basically always driven me to find the answer to what's been wrong with me. And I don't know what that is. My psychologist has pointed it out to me. You know, there's been times where I've tried less hard than others, but for some reason, I've quit healing thousands and thousands of times and given up thousands and thousands of times. And when that moment passes, or that days pass, I just start again. And I can't explain why that is. It's just something inherent that I'm fortunate that I have, but I think there's something about something in me that thinks that I deserve more and that I deserve to be whole and to end up as a version of the person I should have been in the first place, if you know what I mean.
That makes perfect sense.
Driven by it.
Yeah, and it's admirable, it's commendable, but I think it's also biological. You know, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor. I'm listening to this somewhat dumbfounded, but I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so I have a foundation, and I've worked with some very enlightened psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors. So I've been around a lot about what you're talking about. And I know that from what I've learned, and this is common knowledge too, the number one function of the brain is to survive. And it seems to me that as damaged as your psychological, your psyche, your biological aspects are because of all that you were exposed to, your brain is still fighting to survive. And I think that's awesome that you're responding in the way that you are and continually searching for those answers.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I try not to, people will probably disagree with this, but I'm not a believer in self-will, and I can't sell the argument well enough why I don't believe in self-will, but I try not to take credit for it because it's something that's implicit in me, inside me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not consciously doing this. This is just, I couldn't have done it any other way. The drive to keep on healing has come from, not from my conscious choice. Mm-hmm. So it's something biological. It's something I don't understand and something that other people may not have. And that's why they're not able to keep on pushing themselves to do the same thing I have.
Right.
But I didn't create that. That came with my genes, presumably.
Yeah.
For me, by the time I was 17 or 18, it felt like my whole life should have been opening up for me. But in a way, my life was kind of already over for me, that there was no hope. I didn't have any friends left anymore. And it became a survival mechanism, as you said, like what my brain is doing to get me to this point now. But having said that, no matter how dark it's got and no matter how many times I've given up, I've always believed the best is yet to come for me. And I always believe that I've always wanted to become physically strong because I was so frozen my entire life and I'm unable to take actions. And I believe I am just determined to have not only just a regular life, but a one that I want to live. I know there's a lot of pain to go through yet to get there because I still don't function properly, even though my brain functions a lot better than it used to. But I'll have to say that, like I'm completely driven to just have the life that I want. And I just won't accept anything less than that, which is handy. Anyway.
It's kept you alive, obviously. And
it has.
You know, from, as I said, from an outsider's view, listening and looking in, it appears to be self-will, although I completely understand what you're saying in terms of not feeling that, because I think it is biological. I think it is psychophysiological. I think it is your brain doing everything it can to function, but it's articulated in a way that says what you just said. I want the best life that I can possibly have. You're deserving of that, obviously, and I think your determination is fascinating, and I really want you to find that for yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. That's very it's really nice of you to say. And I think based on what I've seen, that there's good chances that I should have been dead already. Like I could have been just disappeared into drugs and alcohol, which, to a degree I did for a time. But because of all the therapy I did, I started not needing to drink anymore. The chances that I get to where I am right now with the capacity and the prospects I have are kind of extraordinary, I think, and unusual. Part of what I'm talking about is trying to circumvent everyone, if people, to get to a more direct path to healing and not have to go through all the false steps. But yeah, to get back on track, I was in Sydney, black dog interventions hadn't worked, but it started expanding my mind into alternative therapies, and I did too many things to mention. Some involved nudity and sort of like little love fest retreats type thing, and those people were lovely, but my attachment disorder did not make that a comfortable experience for me. And I hooked up with this wellness snake oil salesman, I'll call him. He comes from your shores and he was in Sydney, and I spent a lot of money and a lot of time doing his work, which was sham. But he said to me, David, I will help you. Like I will help you change. I will heal you. And I was so broken that I was just a little kid trapped in a man's body. And he said he'd be my father, or, use those things about making promises about the things that I needed to hear. I've always wanted to be rescued, and I've always just been waiting to be rescued. Well, in one way, as a waste of money, but it did partly introduce me into the body-mind connection for the first time. And we were doing things like having giant foam cubes and baseball bats and smashing that and releasing anger at our parents. But the most important thing he ever said to me was that the relationship with your therapist or the people was the thing that really heals you. And through those programs, there was a big group of about 20 people at a time, and I met a man named Eddie. And Eddie is back home now in San Francisco. And we've kept in touch almost weekly since I left Sydney in end of 2018. And he was living there. And we have been fused in our healing together. And he's been one who I would not have existed. I wouldn't have got to this point if I didn't form that relationship with him. And I think he'd probably say the same thing about me. We haven't physically held each other, but we've been there. Certainly when I've been screaming and crying over the phone and needing to be witnessed in my pain is what he did for me. And that connection of finding my friend Eddie is one of the most important things in my life. And no matter how much money I spent on that snake oil salesman, I guess it was probably worth it to meet Eddie. By the time, after about 3.5 years in Sydney, I wasn't getting my contract renewed, and the guy who employed me just refused to meet with. He'd discuss it, but I was still so depressed and so full of shame that I couldn't even take the action to look for a job. I was that broken still. But my friend suggested she'd gone back to the newspaper I'd worked in with Darwin and said, well, you come back here, they're looking for a deputy digital editor. So the guy who was the editor had employed me before and strangely employed me again. So I left Sydney, and I did that partly because I was just stuck. I couldn't take action. I was frozen. But once again, I needed to get away. Sydney was busy and I wanted to go somewhere where I could slow down. And I thought, yeah, I'll do that for a year. Once again, I'll be healed. Of course, that didn't. I got here in January 2019. And things, I struggled. I really struggled still. But at that point, I'd been listening to a lot of books, audio books, like The Body Keeps the Score and Waking the Tiger and lots of these body-oriented books. And I couldn't read a book because I couldn't concentrate too much and I'd get really overwhelmed. But I listened to audiobooks. And I remember driving from Melbourne to Sydney because I couldn't fly because I was so claustrophobic. And it's a 10-hour trip versus like a 1.5-hour trip. But I was listening to Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And he described this scenario where this baby was nuzzling in its mother's breast. And I felt disgusted and repulsed by it. I thought, oh, hang on, wow, what's that? That's not good. That opened up a whole level of, oh my God, there's something seriously here that I don't know about. And I became really depressed about that. But in Darwin, I just kept on listening to the audiobooks. Like I listened to so many, it became an obsession. I went and quit my job and went with this new newspaper, and I was introduced to attachment theory, and I diagnosed myself as having a really highly disorganized attachment. So it meant that my care, that I was afraid of my caregiver, and I started learning about inner parts work, inner children, and I isolated 4 inner children that I have inside me. I have a baby, and I have a 5-year-old, and I have a teenager, and I have a sort of young adult who I talk to. Me and them hated each other when we first started out on this path. I hated them. But things were still not working, and I'd started MDMR and I thought that was going to change my life, and it didn't work. And then I'd learned about this drug called DMX, which is in some cough syrups, and it's like ketamine. And I was too claustrophobic and anxious to get on a plane to fly anywhere. I wanted to do psychedelics, but I couldn't leave Darwin, essentially. And I resorted to drinking cough syrup. There's a little calculator you can get online that tells you how much to drink to put yourself in a dissociated state, various levels that you want to go to. And I settled in on this one level, and I had to drink that awful, disgusting stuff. And I did that 75 times from about, say, February to November. I did it almost 1.5 times a week. And mostly I would drive out to the bush outside of Darwin. In Australia, we have a thing called a swag, which is like a canvas bedroll that kind of becomes a bit of a tent. I would just go out to this secluded bush and I would take it and I would spend 4 or 5 hours out of there, and I would cry and I would scream and I'd rage and whatever was coming out of me at that time. And it was horrific. It was all I could handle. Like, I could barely tolerate what was coming out of me. And I also realized that the reason why I didn't do it at home is because I didn't want to make any noise, because I was terrified of making any noise whatsoever. And I also hated people. Like, I realized that I was terrified. I didn't want to see anyone to see me in my pain. Like, it was a pathological resistance to anyone seeing what my pain was. So I do it out in the bush. It was horrific. It was about as bad as I could. Well, things got worse later on, but that was pretty bad. Anyway, I'd done that for a while. And there was this one time, like it happened before in Sydney, where I developed this obsession with my throat and thinking that I was going to have an itchy inside my throat and I'd never be able to scratch it. And it sent me insane. And it sent me to an emergency department before to get Valium. And it started rising again. And one afternoon at work, it was happening again. I was going to panic. And I rang Eddie to calm down. And then I said, I'm going to take the rest of the day off. I booked a motel outside of town, somewhere a bit remote. And I bought some cough syrup on the way and I took it. And it was really different than any other experience on cough syrup I'd had. And I just lay there and I was sweating, and it was this really broken type sleep thing. And then this came to me, like it just struck me. My mother sexually abused me when I was a child. It just like hit me out of nowhere. And I believed it. Like, I instantly believed it. It was rationally and intellectually miles away from the mother I knew. But my body was telling me this. And when I went with it, I was marching up and down my hotel room, clenching my fists and raising them above and like in rage and stuffing a towel in my mouth and raging. I'd never felt more alive. But when I was denying it, I'd toggle between the two and I'd deny it. And then I'd get depressed again and I would curl up and I wouldn't be able to move. And I thought, I've got to go with this as if it's the truth. And coincidentally, I had a session with Claudia, my psychologist, that night, a few hours later. And she said, just, be careful, because you may be blaming your mother for something that she didn't protect you from someone else. I got upset about that. And I still couldn't rationalize it. My small, beaten down, sort of victimized mother, I just couldn't rationalize it. But at the same time, I was convinced it was true, because it explained my whole life, explained everything. It explained why I was frozen and why I had drunk so much, and it did everything. There I was. And I think it was the first time I listened to my true self. And apart from the trying to rationalize how it would be possible that my mother would do that, my body has never wavered from that belief. I don't have any memories whatsoever, obvious, in the way that we think about memories. Sorry, I've got to say, that was Tuesday, November 8th, 2022. I remember it. And in the thousands of hours of release work I've done, my evidence for and my belief in what happened to me has got stronger. And going into it, I didn't know anything about the fact that you could have these dissociative or suppressed or forgotten memories. And I probably wouldn't have believed it. And it's become difficult. And it's part of the reason why I got onto this podcast and wanted to tell my story, was because I went out and looked for this information, and it was really hard to find information about people who, as an adults, believe that they've been sexually abused pre-verbally and then remember. And where do you go with that information? Because my whole life I've been taught to believe in like explicit memories, and this was something that my body was telling me. So that became an intellectual struggle, I guess, that I carried on. And as I said, my body never wavered from the belief that that's what happened to me. But it's the work that I've done in extreme, intense release since then. I got onto psychedelics and breath work and myofascial massage. And since then, I felt it was sexual abuse and that I'd been, my mother tried to kill me maybe multiple times, like a feeling of being strangled and a feeling of being drowned. You know, that stinging in your nose you get when you're a kid and you jump in the pool and it all shoots up into your nose. I got that from nowhere. And the more work I did, it just seemed there was more like a prolonged, sustained, sadistic, sexual and violent abuse when I was a baby. And as Bessel van der Kolk's book says it, the body keeps the score.
I need to interrupt you because I cannot get out of my head what you're talking about and relating to Bessel van der Kolk's book. Just everything that you're talking about just screams, the body keeps the score. You know, I've had other guests on this show that talk about having no explicit memory of their abuse, but they know it happened. I just want to interject. I believe from the depths of my soul, David, that what you're talking about is so accurate and so probable and believable that I want my audience to hear me say that, because I think you are spot on. I do. I think you are onto something, and because that you have not wavered since making this awareness discovery in your mindset, I think that speaks volumes also. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. That was perfect. It's the validation of, like, from where I've come from and having to find my own sense of legitimacy in this has been really difficult. And it's beautiful that you said that, and not only for me, but for everyone who has listened and listens to your podcast. I think that's amazing. It was something that I believe, but I've had such full-on memories without having pictures in my head since then, which I'll get to, that I just became more and more sure of certain things that had gone on that came out of my body, especially around body working. And I'd done body working with this particular woman here in Darwin years ago, but I was frozen up and it made no impact apart from hurting. And I was doing 2-hour sessions on a Saturday and 1-hour sessions during the week. It's around 130 hours I did over the last year or so, and I haven't done it recently because it became too overwhelming, because I think I'm getting to the most horrible core part of it. But she was put on a glove and she would massage inside my mouth. And most of the 130 hours is her being massaging inside of my mouth. And I would have specific sensations or feelings of hatred or anger or shame or feeling like I was being raped come up when that was happening. And it was also beyond what I say, it's beyond pain. It's been so painful, her touching my mouth sometimes, that I think it exists on, it kind of feels like it exists in another dimension, in that it is so painful that my body cannot actually tolerate the level of pain that's coming up. And it seems like there's a knowing pain that goes beyond what I could actually physically feel. This has been a new understanding for me as well. It's taken me to this assumed or understood pain when my body could no longer tolerate what was happening. And it was like at times that she was sticking a hot knife through my gums and like reaching around while she was like massaging inside my mouth. I would have very specific feelings that happened while that was coming up. So yeah, like I said, my body couldn't register the level of pain that was happening. And for 2 years inside my mouth has been really painful, sometimes to a point where I can't sleep, and even taking strong painkillers won't take the pain away. And from what I can see, there's been no research done on this. So it's out in the woo ether, but I'm a data set of one, and I can only tell you what I experienced. And I can't even tell you how trauma, like how is it chemically or how is it stored in the body? I don't know. They say it's myofascial release, they're stretching the fascia. But I have healed from this, and I've experienced reliving what happened to me as a child through this as well. And that's it. Bizarre.
I'm speechless. I can't think of the words that I want to say that could validate more what it is that you've experienced. I think this is probably one of the most critical episodes that I'm going to air, because my audience needs to hear this, because there are others who've felt the same sensations. It worries me that I'm going to make you feel discounted or diminished, but what I'm actually trying to do is make you feel validated in saying this is not isolated. You are among a few of my guests who've had such horrific, horrible things happen to them that the brain just cannot embrace the issues. A lot of it, I know, is because of the age that you were at. I mean, the brain just isn't capable of processing or forming memory at that age. There's just not the biological function of the hippocampus and the hypothalamus and the chemicals that are required to form memories that could be verbalized or articulated. But truly, it's obvious that what you've experienced is so real and so authentic, so raw. It makes me want to reach out to you and just say, David, I hope you feel my embrace of appreciation and validation for everything that you're talking about. Dude, Thank you for being here.
Thanks for that, Dave. I think that's an important intercession into it. And previously, before I really started healing, I probably would have felt unvalidated by that because I needed my pain to be so special. Because basically, I think that's all I had. You know, that was my evidence, which I wasn't aware what it was, but my pain was so special. I listened to a book a couple of months ago about sexual abuse. It said something about victims feeling like, or maybe childhood sexual abuse victims, about the feeling of about to be annihilated. And I thought, what? Like, that's how I feel. Like, I thought I'm the only person who feels like that, but I'm not. And that was actually really good for me because I thought, oh, wow, this is just a textbook feeling of further evidence of what I've gone through. People feel like this when they've experienced what I've experienced. Anyway, the drinking the cough syrup was, I was having to put orange juice and freeze it. I was getting sick. I was moving on from orange juice. It was a bit too disgusting. And it was getting hard to come by, and Darwin's not a big place, and I had to go and pharmacy shop to even get it and then they stopped stocking it mainly anyway. So my friend had done an ayahuasca retreat, and if you'd done it, you could invite someone else, and she invited me. I just signed up without thinking. Then I started panicking. So in January, so November 8, I had my realization, and in early January, I was going to start basically 2 months later. And I couldn't fly still, so I had to drive. What was going to be a 2,200-mile drive down to the top of New South Wales, there's basically only one road that goes across the top of Australia, and it got flooded, and I didn't know when it was going to open again. So I had to go all the way down and come back up across. So it was a 3,500-mile trip to get to this retreat place. And on the way, my jaw started shattering involuntarily. And I'd got to the point where I couldn't breathe properly. And it was like I was going to die, but my breath was so shallow. All this stuff was coming to the surface. And the ayahuasca retreat was 2 ayahuasca sittings and 2 San Pedro cactus sittings over 6 days. And I just limped out of that joint. I was broken after that. And it was a whole shamanic ceremony in the bush, and this property in the bush in Australia. It was really beautiful. It took everything I had. Well, it was one of the hardest things I ever done is to drink that juice because I was terrified of what was going to happen to me. I thought I was going to have the most evil stuff come out of my mind and destroy me. But they say ayahuasca only gives you what you can handle. After about half an hour, they have little bowls there so you can vomit in. I had it sitting there, and I could barely get it up because I vomited that quickly that I nearly missed. And then I started seeing these geometric patterns, and I panicked because I always needed to be in control. And I thought, oh, what have I done? I've signed myself up for 6 hours of this. I'm going to be lost in this abyss. And I panicked. I went outside, and I thought, why am I the only person going outside? And I just realized that, that was my whole life. I wanted to get away from people. I couldn't be in a room with people. I was scared. It was a really nice experience, and I felt warm, but I had this sense of doom going, something bad is about to happen. And then it just occurred to me that was my view of the world, was that I was just about to be destroyed, and it was the sexual abuse talking, and nothing bad was actually going to happen to me. In this trip on ayahuasca was going to be beautiful. and it was. I hopscotch, like a neon hopscotch field thing opened up, and the little David, because it was in this shed thing, and I looked back and it looked like an old farmhouse, and I went back into childhood. Not much else really happened apart from knowing that that whole doom scenario was my viewpoint in life because of my mother's abuse and when the next thing was going to happen. And when we woke up in the morning and we had to share what happened to them, I also said, no matter how bad it had got last night, I would not have asked anyone for help. No matter how horrific or how terrifying my experience was, I just would never have asked anyone for help because on a subconscious level, that child thought everyone was going to kill them. They were trying to kill me, and I would never reach out for help at all. So it was an amazing realization to have, that what was operating my life in the background. And then a couple of days later, or the next day, I had San Pedro cactus for the first time, and I went into this like a hyperventilated breathing, like I couldn't catch my breath anymore. And people came and helped me and held me, and I went into this terror and panic. This was the first of many times this happened to me after that, where I felt like I was being choked, like I was being killed, and that there was no way I was ever going to be able to get my breath back. There was embedded inside of me that sensation, and in breath work and just in life after that for a while, it happened quite often until I exercised all that energy and emotion and trauma from my body, and that doesn't happen to me in the same way. But that convinced me that my mother had tried to kill me. It also explained why I've been so claustrophobic in planes, because one of the things was it wasn't I was going to crash, it was because I needed oxygen and I didn't have real oxygen, and I went into panics about that. Nothing ever explained my claustrophobia before that. When I realized that nothing bad was going to happen to me on that ayahuasca trip and that it was just my view of the world, I actually started laughing. Like it was like, oh my God, like this is the whole answer. This is the answer to my life. This is what it is.
Wow. It all sounds so validating, but did you feel it was a validating experience at the time? Were you consciously aware of what you just said? Oh my gosh, this is what's going on. This is what's happened. Or did that come later?
It happened then, and it grew in strength as I went on. And the second time I took ayahuasca, I released a little, I cried. And it was also taught part of me to slow down. You're not going to release this all in one session. And I thought, oh no, 6 hours of crying, I'll get this out of my system. There's been about 2,000 hours of that sort of stuff since then. Wow. I realised that it just takes time. I did get that validation and insight. And then one of the participants was going to this nearby Hare Krishna farm. And I thought, oh, well, I'll do that. So I went and hung with the Hare Krishnas, and I went down. They had this beautiful American-style barn. There was a guy milking cows there, like about 7-10 cows. And there's a lot of trauma in me with milking cows. So I said, I'll come and milk the cows with you in the morning. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got up and went to milk the cows with him. And I started feeling so full of dread and so full of terror. And I realized, oh my God, there's still so much trapped in here. But I did get to meet like the guy who introduced George Harrison of the Beatles to the Hare Krishnas and was living on that farm, and he came down every morning and got a glass of raw milk, which is quite extraordinary. But then this woman who I went to the Hare Krishna farm with, her sister went away and they wanted someone to house sit, and it was this beautiful little town on the coast nearby. And I didn't go back to Darwin for 3 months. I stayed and looked after their house, and when they came back, they were so nice that they said, stay, David, you can stay as long as you want. And I found that really, really uncomfortable. I felt so worthless that someone was offering me love that it felt really bad. But at the same time, I had this longing for that love. These were such lovely people, and they'd done such, the guy, the father he'd done psychedelics, acid in the 60s, and he was really into meditation and stuff. And they were really healed, and they were beautiful people. And before they'd come home, I'd, through my new connections, found some magic mushrooms because it was a hippie area of Australia. And I took magic mushrooms almost every day or every second day for about 20 days. And I wrote briefly about one of my early experiences. If you'd like to test out my writing and get an account of what happened to me after I took magic mushrooms, or in one of the senses, if you're open to that.
Absolutely.
This was the first of many times then and since that I'd spent hours lying in the shower or lying on the toilet, the floor of the bathroom, maybe wrapped around the toilet. I've hundreds of times I've vomited in the toilet or on myself. So this is what I wrote about one of my initial experiences. I felt vile darkness. It's beyond terror. It's ongoing, endless and sadistic. It stomped hope to death, crushed it. It's violent. It's everything. It is the whole world. There is nothing good, and good is not possible. It is evil. There is no possibility of anything in the world but evil. It is all that I am, and I can barely hold myself still with the pain in my body as it comes to me. I just want to keep moving to avoid it, even if it's just a moment of relief. Pain is the wrong word, really. It doesn't physically hurt, except maybe the searching for more heaving, the full body thrusting at the end of vomiting. And I want to do everything I can not to feel it, because what I'm feeling is beyond terror. I've looked up the thesaurus for a synonym that goes with the word, but I can't find anything to describe how threatening, repulsive, how inescapable, how evil everything in it is. The terror is a fear that is worse than the fear of death. It's a sense of impending annihilation that seems like it would be an infinite torment of pure evil. I look into the toilet bowl expecting to see black bile. It feels like I'm vomiting up rape, vomiting up the heinous, the hideous, the horrible, the beyond terror. I look for the physical sign of what it feels like, that purge of evil, but it's just a reddy orange bubbly mess of what used to be Vita Wheats with cheese and tomato and stomach acid. The stomach acid is really the flavor of abuse. Stomach acid is the flavor of evil. Stomach acid tastes like rape. I want to vomit. I want my vomit to be black really badly. I want that. I don't know why. Then I guess I feel like there's some sort of magical cure. The sadness that came after vomiting is also beyond, so far beyond where the meaning of the word sadness ends. So far that is hidden over the horizon of sadness. Sadness could never even imagine this level of distress. It's like a being in itself, not an emotion. It's an entity, and it's an experience of the world, not an emotion. It's a wretchedness. It's a dolor. It's a betrayal, abuse, terror. It's as if betrayal, abuse, and terror were synthesized as the chemical elements, the building blocks of my life to construct the molecules of my body. It feels like I'm the only person on earth. There's no way of being comforted because there's no such thing as comfort. And I found myself lying on the shower floor and having the shower run on the back part of my neck. And this brought up new feelings of terror. And I started saying, "Mummy, please don't kill me," over and over again. And something like, "Mummy, you're hurting me," and "Mummy, you're raping me," and "Mummy, I love you." And then the muscles in my neck had like frozen. And I was like holding on tight. Like I just froze up and then went stiff. That's an indication of the experience of those sessions. I'm lucky in the fact that the mushrooms somehow release defenses, but also, like, it sounds horrific, but they also act as a barrier or a buffer to the full intensity of what you're experiencing. So I can describe it, but I don't think I fully actually felt like that. I would probably die. It's hard to explain.
David, I'm so very sorry for the experiences that you've lived through. I can't imagine. I did want to ask, and maybe what you just read answered this, but I want to verify what my question, I want to hear the answer. After you had the cactus, and you said you were like gasping, as though someone were strangling you. Those around you then embraced you and held you. Did the holding of you help or exacerbate those feelings?
There was this tension going on there. I think that my caregiver was the source of people tending to me and being nice to me is threatening to me. I don't think it made it worse. I think it helped it. Like, I may not have been able to connect with those people properly, but when I said I've always wanted to be rescued, there's a smallest part of me that has always wanted someone to hold me and do that, to take that pain away. So that's what it was about. I've always hated touch. I didn't understand why. Like, I hated being hugged. I hated people being nice to me. And I hated anyone seeing my pain. So this was all the antithesis of what I wanted, or part of me what I wanted. But it was also the start of healing, because if I don't let people in, then I don't heal. I can't do it on myself. Like, I can't be an island and heal, because I have to let people in to heal me.
Right. There's such a dichotomy there in what you're describing, needing love, but not wanting to accept any of what's coming your way. But you're so right. I'm curious, again, everything I think of to ask and talk about makes me feel like I'm risking diminishing you and your story, and I certainly don't want to do that. That is not my goal. There's a couple of questions. First question, have you heard the episode with Katie Stewart? I don't have the episode number on the top of my head, but I'll reference it in the notes of this show. She was manipulated and tricked into going to a hotel room while she was in Greece doing some nanny work.
Yeah, I've heard that, yes.
Yeah. And she has some different biology going on in her brain. It, I think, exacerbated the fact that she too can't remember specific things that happened. So your story reminds me a lot of what she struggles with in terms of explicit and implicit memory in the body keeping the score. So I'm glad you've heard that, because I would recommend you listening to that just to feel some sort of connection. Like you said, there's a connection with others when you listen to these stories. And I hope, as another aside, I hope that there is some connection that is made between you and other guests that can relate to what you've been through, because I think there is healing in community. The other question I have, though, too, have you read the book The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog by Bruce Perry?
No, I've never even heard of it.
I want to recommend that. I want other audience members who haven't heard of it or who haven't read it. To me, it was a life-changing book. Another life-changing book that I think also relates to a lot of what you're saying, besides The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, is Instrumental by James Rhodes. Just some connections. That's all I mention them for. David, there's just so much to unpack and discuss with what you've described. I'm curious, where are you in this healing journey that you mentioned? I deserve to be whole. Where do you go from here? What is ahead for you?
Well, interesting question. I've been so controlling over this whole last 3 years. I've kept a logbook of every time I took cough syrup and how many hours I cried for and what date it happened, and every time I took cactus. Or I think I had to provide evidence for the world about how bad it was, and I documented it, and I haven't done that recently, which I think is a good sign. And I think, I forget what the book it is, is it The Four Pillars? Or I remember reading this book saying that you have to wander out in the desert and get lost. And I think I'm lost, I no longer profess to know what's happening really for me. About 2.5 months ago, when I was doing body work, a lot of my body work was on a massage table, but sometimes when she massaged my chest, I would go and lie on the floor. Sometimes some of this release looks like I'm having an exorcism, like in a Hollywood movie, like I'm just shaking voluntarily. And in these instances, I was just lying on the floor, no padding or anything, and tiles, and holding onto the chair. And that's the only way I could tolerate what was coming out of my body. In that, there was these thrusting motions where it felt like I was being penetrated from behind. Just all this involuntary stuff. And I think doing some of that for the first time flipped me over, or I went too far. I started having terror that never went away. The impending doom just sat in my brain. And in a way, that's still the case. It's just the heightened level of impending doom and terror, like I'm just about to be wiped out, is current for me at the minute. And I stopped doing that. That week, my newspaper boss said, my family don't want to pay for this newspaper anymore. It's just going to have to survive on its own, and we can only afford to employ you part-time. I was terrified because I wasn't going to earn enough money. The next day, I got up in the morning and I wrote a letter to my mother. Just like 3 hours of writing a letter to my mother. I haven't spoken to her. Sorry, I didn't include this. I cut off contact with my parents soon after I got here in 2019 because I had this sense of terror whenever my father rang me. And my mother never ever rang me. I'd spoken to my mother on the phone when my father had called, but since I left home, I don't ever remember my mother calling me. As a 45-year-old man, I thought, why am I getting so terrorized about my parents? Anyway, I cut them off. Hadn't spoken to my mother, and I wrote it down and I sent it off to her. And I've just been living in this really difficult world for the last 2.5 months, where I've just sat with the pain. Taking the psychedelics, even small amounts, became too much for me. And I've just been trying to accept where I am and not knowing what the next path will be, and just learning to be resilient enough to sit with what was coming up for me and being patient and developing an even closer relationship with my inner children. And the one big shift is that I started letting that child, crazy for people who perhaps are not into this thing, but this baby speaks for me and speaks to me and tells me it hates me sometimes. And I go out in the bush once again. I bought a punching bag and I hang it to a tree and I let it rage out with a baseball bat or scream or do whatever it wants. So I don't know exactly where I'm at. I'm still confident that I'll get through this. But then I have to go back and see the small amount, the evidence. Like, I think that's one of the most important things that I've learned in healing is to go think, okay, how do I compare now than I did 3 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago? What's the difference? And I always see this change for the better. I said to my housemate recently, I think maybe sometimes that you can become really functional and do a lot of healing and become better at your life, but the pain is the last thing that goes. You know, my enjoyment of life is not there yet, but I'm becoming a much more functional human being. And so one of the things, almost 1 year ago, me and my mates started jogging, and we started going around a high school cricket oval, which is about 400 metres. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is, imperial. And we nearly died doing that. And we've been doing that mostly 3 times a week for a year. And we've incorporated other exercise. So I can now run a 5 kilometre in relatively decent time, and we use kettlebells and other homemade weights, and we do routines, and I've kept that up, and I'm fit and I'm strong, and my body is starting to embody what I always wanted to be. And I think I'll end up being amazingly fit and powerful. And I think that's giving a message to me and a child that I can take care of myself and I can take action. So I think that's one. I've never been able to exercise my whole life, apart from when I was a teenager, I played sport for the local teams, but I've never been able to put a year's worth of consistent exercise. And I think that's a really strong sign. So
I do too. That's amazing. It's a dopamine rush. Well, and something that I think probably would help. You know, I don't know, but it sounds like it's being helpful. Yeah. David, who right now is your main support system?
My housemate I'm close to, and she's going through her own healing journey, but she's not far as along as I am, and I'm getting she's been the one I've been quite resistant to sharing with her, but I'm helping her in her journey and I'm opening up more to her. So I have that really stable family life. I don't really have family outside of that. I told my sisters about the abuse a year after almost a year after it occurred to me or came to me. And they said they believed me, but one of them has just started, they stopped contacting me. Like the emails stopped. And I hadn't been speaking to them either before this happened. I'd cut them off as well. It wasn't their fault, but I just needed to cut off from my family. So I'm just starting to develop a relationship maybe with one of my sisters again. And I have Eddie, who's been my soulmate, but he, sometimes people get on with their own lives and they get, he's in a point where he doesn't have as much time for me. And I have another healing friend, Karima, who I've had a similar relationship with to Eddie, but because she was a woman, it was different and harder, I think. But she's a bit busy now, so I don't get her. But the breathwork person I was working with, I don't do that work anymore, but she's had her own struggles, and we're interacting as well. So I kind of have to grow up and become adult and realize that sometimes my closest support network are not available to me, and I adapt, So I've always I feel like you don't need that many people around you to understand, to share with, and I've got enough that if someone's not available, someone else will be available to me. And those people have been integral to my healing, and they're my core people.
Am I correct in understanding that right now you are not seeing a therapist?
Well, I'm seeing my Uruguayan therapist. I've been seeing her since like 2020 or 2021,
Okay.
regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And she is probably more a morale boost, and she's always a few steps ahead of me, perhaps trying to guide me into letting go of things. She was also integral to my healing. I trust her implicitly. Like, there's invitations to express outside of our sessions as well. And one thing I did over the last 3 years is I taught myself Photoshop for the actual newspaper I was working for, because we had to create thumbnails. And I've expressed myself through digital art to express some of the most painful stuff. So I send her art. I just talk to her probably we do it every 2 weeks now. And she's just a sounding board for how I'm going into. And I always find that it helps me recalibrate. And if I'm starting to feel down, talking to Claudia will just pick me up again and give me a zhuzh and some energy to refocus and go again.
And so I take it then that she validates and takes what you're describing. She recognizes the veracity and reality of those issues, even though they're not explicit. She's comprehensive of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Her initial warning about when I told her about it was like she believed me, but to be careful about knowing that it was my mother. But she has always validated me since then, and I've ranted, like typed away the most furious, painful diatribes to her, and she's always responded with kindness and love like that. So she's always completely validated me. Sometimes she's infuriated me with suggestions about doing things nice for myself, and she's probably one of the first people I've actually been able to express healthy anger with, and she's been really encouraging of me doing that as well. But she's been essential for it, and partly because, as I said before, about the extra softness maybe that comes with that sort of Spanish European influence as well, in contrast to what I've had.
So that last comment just made me wonder, does the femininity part of it interfere with the healing? Have you felt that at all, or is that not an issue?
I think it's been an issue. I recognise that I hated all women, and I may not have, I didn't act that out in my life, as in I wasn't misogynistic or said anything, but obviously, I suppressed a lot of that down. But part of my pattern with women was to get drawn in really, really quickly and like be infatuated and have really intense relationships and then go cold and cut them dead. So having a woman that has been a real challenge I see now, because I had to work on healing that connection with women and trust, which before I started I didn't even realise existed. I always had tried to avoid male psychologists a lot of the time because my father was sort of authoritarian, and my whole life I spent thinking that my father was the problem, but it was really, really, well, it was both of them, but to a larger degree my mother. That's been part of it, to accept love, I guess. I think, can experience love from a psychologist. I was listening to a book last night about the Greek language and how it has 14 different words for love, so love can think with a greater finesse than we can express love. So if I say love, it sounds a bit weird that my psychologist and I love each other because it sounds unprofessional, but it's a difference, it's a caring that I think exists.
Yeah. Is love the cure?
It's as simple as that, Dave. It's just love. I can honestly say that I got to living in Darwin this last time, so in the last 4 or 5 years, not knowing what love was. When I was a kid, it was a concept of American sitcoms, cheesy love. And when I said, my parents weren't directly harsh or abusive to me as most of my life. But I didn't even know love was it you needed love. Like, I just thought, that's just crazy talk. What are you talking about? And it hit me pretty hard when I realised that, love's kind of pretty important, and I hate love. But it seems that if you have someone who deeply loves you and can empathise with you and be an empathic witness when you're a child, a lot of the damage can be alleviated early on because you have someone who understands and listens to you. And I'm not at the point of being able to love anyone properly yet, but I think love is a big answer to it. And never in a billion years did I think I would be saying that.
Yeah. I'll give you a spoiler alert about The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is that Bruce Perry strongly believes what you have been talking about, that love is a critical component of healing. And I truly, from the bottom of my heart, hope that that love penetrates your deepest pains and gets you to a point where you do realize that feeling of wholeness in your own life. It's obvious that it's important to you and critical to you.
Mm.
I have a couple of last questions that I want to wrap this up with, and that is, who else have you told this story to in the fashion that you've told it to me?
Can I just first say something about what you just said? I think if you had have said that to me 6 months ago, I would have hated you. Like, just my reaction to someone being so expressively nice was just the level of hatred I had for the world. Just helps me realize how far I've come. Who else have I told this story to in this form? No one.
No one. Wow.
I've told a few people, friends and family members by email, and I've told a couple of people, friends, over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, nothing like this. And my inner child was screaming out. My inner child wants so much attention, and but the way I've lived my life is to stay out of the limelight, but yet I'm so needy and so fixated on attention in a way that this is what my inner child was crying out for as well, to tell the world.
I think it's awesome that you have. Wow. This is powerful, powerful stuff. I hope you recognize that you really have come a long way just from your description of where you were and where you are now. Having not ever experienced talking to you about this, I can't make a real big comparison. It just is amazing to me to hear you talk about yourself in the way that you are, and the fact that you have the capability of doing so and not folding and not saying, okay, I'm done, Dave. We're not going to do this anymore and don't air this. You haven't done that. You've been strong and capable and amazing through this whole process. So let me ask you this. You've probably heard me ask this to almost every guest that I've had on the show. My concern about what happens after we hang up. How will you deal with the knowledge that you have just expressed to the world? Some things that have been very, very difficult, traumatic, painful, and now you've released a lot of that through this podcast episode. What will you do when we're done with this conversation to take care of yourself? What will you do tomorrow? What will you do a week from now when the memory of sitting here with me takes full grip? How will you cope?
Yes. I don't know how I'm going to react to this in the coming days. I think there's going to be some kickback because I think that inner child, that baby, is going to go into a terror response about the punishment that's going to come from telling the story. So I think I'll have waves of terror and panic. And also, when I have conversations with people, I realise now that when I hang up, I feel a sense of abandonment. In every close friends, I just feel abandoned when the conversation ends. So I'm aware that those two things are going to happen. I'm lucky that I don't have to work today, and I don't have to work probably for another 4 days if I don't want to. I'm going to have some comfort food. There's a little Indonesian simple joint up the street that I like to eat that makes me feel really comforted. I think I'm going to go for a walk, and that involves walking. That will be really nice for me. And I don't think I'll put enough thought into how I am going to look after myself. I will do exercise tonight with my mate, and I probably need to find someone to debrief with about this and talk about my experience. And I need to be really vigilant about having conversations with that part of me that's in pain or is abused, and especially letting that part of me talk. And even if I have to get in the car and go for a drive, which I often do, and let that part of me scream or hate or say the most vile things possible, I'll do that as well.
David, thank you seems so inadequate.
I appreciate that. My inner child for my whole life, I know, has wanting to tell people this story because One of the things that I realized about the abuse was that I was muted. And I think my mother physically restricted me from making any noise, and she potentially beat me if I screamed or cried out or anything. And the thing that my inner child wants most, apart from love, is to say what happened, to be truthful about what happened to it. So that's why, I won't waver on wanting to tell this story and having this go out to people, no matter how much I dislike the publicity of being in the spotlight. And I will say, you thank me for being on it. The fact that you do this show is just, I realise probably don't realise the amount of commitment and time it takes for you to do this show. The resource that it provides and the connection and the insight and the information, like the information I've got from your show about people feeling the same way as I have, has been incredible. You're just doing such amazing work. It sort of blows my mind that I can't quite explain how I feel about it.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things is in this life is, we talked about love, and then you talked often about raising people's awareness, and other people have. And, I spend my life writing about people doing corrupt things or bad things and people in really powerful positions. And I've come to realize that it's like whack-a-mole, that I am fighting against wounded people. Like, everyone around me is decidedly wounded, and I grew up thinking that powerful people, CEOs and politicians, had it all together, and now I just see that all this grab for power and the way they behave is just evidence of their own emptiness and wrong wounding. And that basically everyone's carrying this wounding through their lives, and because they express it in ways that look powerful, that we misinterpret what it really is. And I think my life needs to change to trying to discipline people through journalism when they act out, into expanding the consciousness of knowing that my story is quite extreme, but I don't want that to get in the way of the people. We need to look at power and the way people act and recognize that it's probably just their own trauma being reflected, and this is messing up our world. People aren't acting in the best interest of everyone else because they're too wounded.
I love your insight. I love what you've learned, and I love that you know how to say it. You say it so well.
Thank you.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS podcast. My deepest and most sincere appreciation and gratitude are extended to David Wood for being my guest these past 2 episodes. As you can probably tell from our conversation, I have nothing but true admiration for David because of his genuinely authentic honesty and his willingness to speak out in order to help others heal as he continues to heal. David, you are truly and profoundly a strong force of pursuing justice for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. I cannot thank you enough for being a guest on this show. As always, I'm grateful to you, my listeners, for showing up, for leaning into these discussions, and for helping me continue to normalize the conversation around rape and sexual assault and helping bring justice to victims and survivors. Please keep sharing these episodes, keep talking about them, and keep believing victims and survivors, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week. Hi, SASS listeners. Thanks for staying with me for a few extra minutes. I want to take this opportunity to remind you about Kennedy Alley and her 100-mile challenge coming up on October 18th. Starting on that day, Kennedy will be running her very first 100-mile race. Kennedy is dedicating every single mile to survivors of sexual assault and rape, and she's doing it to raise funds for the Domestic Violence Intervention Services Sex Assault Nurse Examiner Department in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For those of you who may not know, SANE nurses and victim advocates are often among the very first people a survivor encounters after an assault. That first response matters. It can either help a survivor move towards healing, or it can deepen their trauma. The work these nurses and advocates do is extraordinary. They bring empathy, compassion, and a trauma-informed response to crisis situations most people can't even imagine carrying. As a survivor herself, Kennedy wants to acknowledge and honor their contribution to the recovery process by tying her 100-mile run directly to the fundraising for them, because their impact ripples forward in the lives of every survivor they serve. Kennedy's message is simple but powerful. Start by believing. Believe survivors. Listen to their stories and respond with compassion and trauma-informed care. When we do that, we create an environment where healing becomes possible and where survivors are empowered rather than dismissed. Let me close with this request. Please seriously consider helping Kennedy's cause with a donation if it's something you can do. And if it's not, that's okay. If you do decide to donate, you'll find Kennedy's GoFundMe link in this week's episode notes. And please know that Kennedy and I thank you for your support.